Madame Arthur, l'arrivée de Gilbert. Madame Arthur est une femme qui fit parler d'elle longtemps, sans journaux, sans rien, sans réclame. Elle eut une foule d'amour.
The difficulty is to realize the groundlessness of our believing. This is a remark that Wittgenstein makes in one of his final notebooks, which were published after his death as Uncertainty. They're notebooks that take us up to a few days before he dies. They constitute sustained treatment of various questions about knowledge and certainty, and they advance new ideas, ideas not found in earlier work, or so I would claim. Although they're unedited by him and they're characteristically Wittgensteinian, these remarks, they're impressionistic and so forth, we can detect a train of thought in there. So let's have a think about this passage, which I think is key to these notebooks. The difficulty is to realize the groundlessness of our believing. There are two conclusions that we can draw from this. The first is that our believing is ultimately groundless. This is one of the main claims of Uncertainty. But notice that's not the difficulty. The difficulty is not the groundlessness of our believing, but our realizing the groundlessness of our believing. And I think this is key to understanding what's going on in Uncertainty. So the big idea in Uncertainty is this idea about the groundlessness of our believing. Wittgenstein once suggests that our practices of rational evaluation, ordinarily understood, have at their heart irrational commitments. These are what are these days known as the hinge commitments, following a metaphor that he uses in those notebooks, that in order for the door of inquiry to turn, the hinges must stay put. So these basic commitments that we have that have to be in place, they're visceral certainties that have to be in place in order for us to be rational inquirers at all, in order for us to play the game of reasons, to offer reasons for and against a proposition, a belief, in order for us to doubt. If that's correct, then this is a very dramatic claim to make, because it means that both traditional skeptical and traditional anti-skeptical reasoning is problematic right from the outset. The skeptical reasoning, because it takes for granted that we can rationally evaluate all our commitments at once. And yet, of course, we can't do that if some of these commitments have to be in place in order for us to do rational evaluations at all, and which cannot be themselves, therefore, rationally evaluated. But this is the point that cuts both ways. You can't do a positive universal rational evaluation either. You can't, as in the traditional anti-skeptical project, you can't rationally evaluate all our beliefs all at once and find them to be in good order either, because that also would involve a universal rational evaluation, rationally evaluating everything all at once. And Wittgenstein is trying to get us to see in these notebooks that that's not possible. Every time we undertake rational evaluations, we have to have certain basic certainties in place that enable those rational evaluations to occur, the hinges. And they are themselves irrational. So at the heart of our believing is a groundlessness. Nonetheless, and this is a key theme in these notebooks, there's nothing amiss. We shouldn't conclude from this as anything amiss in our practices. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It is in the nature of our practices, our epistemic practices, that they be structured this way. They could not be otherwise. It's a philosophical mistake to think that they could be otherwise. So we've made an error. And once we disabuse ourselves of that error, certain kinds of epistemological puzzles, certain kinds of radical skepticism, for example, are shown to be problematic because they rest on mistaken conceptions of the nature of rational evaluations. So Wittgenstein thinks that at the heart of our practices, our rational practices, are basic irrational commitments, these certainties that have to be in play in order for us to undertake rational evaluations at all. They're entirely mundane claims, by the way. These are everyday common sense certainties that have to be in play. They're things as mundane as I have two hands right now in normal circumstances. More recognized the certainty of that claim, but he thought that its certainty meant that it had a special kind of epistemic status. Wittgenstein thinks that its certainty means that it has no special status at all from a rational point of view. But nonetheless, this doesn't show us the groundlessness of our believing, doesn't show there's anything problematic about our believing. Our beliefs can be perfectly fine and rationally grounded in the normal ways. We just have to recognize that rational evaluations are by their nature local. They're never universal. And to aspire for universal rational evaluations is like aspiring for a circle square. It's no lack on our part that we're unable to do them, any more than it's no lack on our part that we can't draw a circle square or can't conceive of one. And yet Wittgenstein says there's a difficulty here. And the difficulty relates, as I say, not to the groundlessness itself, but to our realizing it. In our ordinary practices, we don't realize this. We're not aware of the special role that our hinge commitments play. In fact, we're not really aware of the hinge commitments at all. They're kind of tacit. They're, in a sense, hidden from us, although they're hidden in plain view. I mean, one's hands is a case in point. The hands aren't hidden. They're right there. But we're never really aware of them. No one teaches you that you've got hands. You're taught to do things with your hands. You're taught a way of viewing the world which presupposes, in normal conditions, that you've got hands. And that's how we acquire our hinge commitments. We, as it were, to use a phrase that he employs, we swallow them down with other things that we are taught and learn. So we're not normally aware of them. They're hidden from view in a certain sense, even though they're hidden in plain sight. In becoming aware of them, though, and becoming aware of them qua hinges, so we now adopt a quite peculiar, unnatural perspective on our epistemic practices, and we become aware of them in a way that we wouldn't ordinarily be aware of them. And that, I think, Wittgenstein recognizes is difficult. It prompts a certain kind of anxiety, what I've elsewhere called epistemic vertigo. It's not that this is a genuine doubt or anything like that. I mean, the reason why I choose the term vertigo is because it's like a phobic reaction. I'm using vertigo here to mean, being scared of being high up. I realize that's not exactly what it means, but since everybody uses it that way, I use it that way too. So when you're high up, you can feel that you're in danger, even though you know full well that you're not. Being high up can generate a certain kind of anxiety. And I think this is what happens when we become aware of our hinge commitments, qua hinge commitments. We end up have a certain kind of detachment from our everyday practices, a certain kind of alienation from them. And it's disconcerting. The everyday starts to look quite uncanny and strange. And that's what makes it difficult to realize the grounds of our believing. Nonetheless, our believing is groundless, ultimately. And this is a deep insight from Wittgenstein's final notebooks.
Qui fit parler